The year 2077 marked humanity's darkest chapter, when Earth's vibrant blue sphere transformed into a desolate wasteland of broken dreams. The Scavengers, an advanced alien species driven by insatiable resource hunger, appeared without warning in our skies, their massive ships blocking out the sun like mechanical thunderclouds. Their first demonstration of power was as strategic as it was horrifying. They shattered our moon, sending massive chunks raining down through the atmosphere, while our oceans rose in rebellion, swallowing coastal cities in tsunami waves that reached miles inland. Panic spread faster than the destruction itself, as governments worldwide scrambled to mount a defense against an enemy whose technology made our most advanced weapons look like children's toys. Millions watched in terror through their view screens as the Scavengers deployed drilling platforms into Earth's crust, extracting minerals and resources with mechanical efficiency, while their ground forces eliminated any resistance. Dreams of future space exploration were replaced by the grim reality of alien invasion, as humanity faced an enemy that viewed us as nothing more than an inconvenience, insects to be brushed aside while they harvested our planet's riches. The aliens hadn't anticipated, however, was humanity's stubborn refusal to surrender without a fight, a defining trait that would eventually become our salvation and our curse. Military leaders from former enemy nations formed unlikely alliances, pooling resources and knowledge to develop weapons capable of penetrating scavenger defenses. Scientists worked around the clock in underground facilities, analyzing alien technology from downed scout ships, while engineers retrofitted nuclear warheads with experimental delivery systems. The desperate plan taking shape would either save humanity or complete the destruction the Scavengers had started. Humanity's desperate plan worked, but the cost was nearly apocalyptic. Modified nuclear warheads devastated the alien forces, but transformed vast regions of Earth into an unforgiving, radioactive wasteland. Nuclear dust clouds blocked the sun for 3 years, killing almost all remaining vegetation and creating a nuclear winter that decimated what was left of Earth's ecosystems. As the last Scavengers fled Earth, leaving behind only the husks of their massive harvesting ships, human survivors faced a bitter truth. We had won the war, but lost our planet. Radiation ravaged entire territories, turning them into alien landscapes where radioactive electrical storms swept across barren plains without warning. Lakes and seas shrank to toxic mud puddles, while survivors clustered in small habitable pockets, fighting for increasingly scarce resources. World leaders, sheltered in underground bunkers, came to an inevitable conclusion. Earth could no longer sustain the entire human population. Our only hope was to leave our dying world behind and establish colonies elsewhere in the solar system. Thus was born Project Exodus, a desperate mission to transport what remained of humanity to Titan, Saturn's largest moon, where previous probes had detected potentially habitable conditions beneath its dense atmosphere. Engineers built a colossal space station named Tete in Earth orbit, serving as the departure point for the largest migration in human history. Hydroelectric generators from the few still functioning watersheds were redirected to power this ambitious evacuation mission, while scientists worked tirelessly to develop terraforming technologies that could create a new home among the stars. Decades after the evacuation to Titan, Earth's surface stood eerily quiet, its once bustling cities now skeletal monuments to humanity's former glory. Yet the planet wasn't completely abandoned. Automated facilities hummed with activity, maintained by an army of drones that scoured the radioactive wasteland for remaining resources. High above the toxic clouds, Jack Harper, designated as Tech 49, lived with his wife Vika in a sleek tower that floated like a sentinel in the sky. Every morning, Jack would descend in his bubble ship to repair damaged combat drones, his daily routine punctuated by brief moments of wonder as he gazed across the ruined landscape that still held a strange beauty. Morning sweep complete, no. Scavenger activity detected. Jack would report back to Vika, who maintained constant communication with mission control aboard the Teat space station. Their assignment was clear: protect the massive hydroelectric generators that converted Earth's remaining water into fusion energy for the human colony on Titan. Vika embraced their mission with unwavering dedication, meticulously following protocols and countdown procedures for their scheduled departure to join the colony in 2 weeks. Unlike Jack, she showed little attachment to the desolate planet below, viewing their tower as merely a temporary outpost in humanity's exodus to the stars. What neither of them questioned was the strange memory wipe they'd undergone at the start of their mission, a security measure that had erased everything except their names and basic training. Yet despite this blank slate, Jack felt an inexplicable connection to Earth that went beyond his assigned duties. In secret corners of his workstation, he collected small treasures, a worn paperback, a Yankees cap, fragments of the past that stirred something deep within him. At night, while Vika slept, he would stare at the stars and wonder why his dreams were filled with images of a world he'd supposedly never known. A life from before the alien invasion that felt strangely familiar. Dreams have a funny way of clinging to the mind, persisting like ghosts that refuse to cross over, and Jack Harper's dreams were becoming more vivid with each passing night. The woman's face haunted him, dark hair, eyes that seemed to recognize him across time and space, always standing beneath the Empire State Building in a world before destruction. These fragments of memory pierced through the fog of his supposedly wiped mind, challenging everything Mission Control had told him about Earth's past and his role in its future. Jack found himself sketching her face during quiet moments, hiding the drawings from Vika, who would certainly report such deviations to their superiors on the Tate space station. The effective security team member maintains focus on the mission, the manual stated, words that Vika repeated whenever Jack expressed curiosity about the world below or the scattered ruins he encountered during his maintenance runs. Yet something about these dreams felt more authentic than the sterile reality of their tower home, with its clinical white surfaces and programmed daily routines. During his drone repair missions, Jack would sometimes make unauthorized detours to visit the ruins of New York, standing in the shadow of half-buried skyscrapers while running his fingers over moss-covered concrete that seemed to whisper secrets from 2077's pre-war past. Most troubling of all was the strange sense of déjà vu that overcame him whenever he discovered artifacts from the old world, a child's toy, a faded photograph, fragments of humanity that triggered emotions far too complex for someone who should have no memory of life before his assignment. Dreams are just random neural firings, Vika would reassure him with clinical detachment. But Jack couldn't shake the feeling that these weren't simply dreams. They were memories fighting their way back through carefully constructed barriers in his mind. Something about the official narrative of the scavenger invasion, the nuclear war, and humanity's evacuation to Titan didn't align with these persistent visions, planting dangerous seeds of doubt in Tech 49's increasingly restless mind. The day that changed everything began like any other. Jack flying his bubble ship through scattered clouds on what should have been a routine patrol mission. The drone beacon had led him to Sector 17, an area of twisted metal and radiation-scorched Earth where something unexpected had crashed through the atmosphere during the night. As he approached the impact site, Jack's heart raced with a feeling he couldn't name, an electric anticipation that seemed to connect directly to his recurring dreams. There, half buried in the wasteland dirt, lay a pre-war spacecraft, a NASA vessel that should have disintegrated decades ago during the moon's destruction and the subsequent alien invasion that had devastated Earth in 2077. Inside the cracked hibernation pod, her face was exactly as it had appeared in his dreams, Julia, though he shouldn't have known her name. When the security drone appeared without warning, its weapon systems activating with the cold logic of its programming, Jack made a split-second decision that would unravel everything. He destroyed the drone, an act of rebellion that sent shockwaves of alarm through the Tate's monitoring systems, and carried the unconscious woman back to his ship. Effective team members report all anomalies, Vika's voice crackled through his communicator. But for the first time since beginning his mission, Jack deliberately withheld information, setting in motion a rebellion he didn't yet understand. Back at the tower, Vika's horror at the sight of the stranger was immediate. Bringing survivors to their clean, secure home violated every protocol in their mission handbook. She'll be sent to Titan with the next transport, Jack promised, though something in him rebelled against the thought of surrendering Julia to Mission Control. That night, as the mysterious woman lay recovering in their medical pod, Jack's dreams intensified, fragments of a shared past, a mission to the stars, a love that existed before the world ended. When Julia finally opened her eyes the next morning, her first words shattered the carefully constructed reality of Tech 49's existence. Jack Harper, where have you been? We were on the Odyssey together. Julia's revelation hit Jack like a physical blow, challenging everything he'd been told about Earth's destruction and humanity's exodus to Titan. The Odyssey was a NASA mission to investigate an object in orbit around Saturn, she explained, her voice growing stronger as Jack's face reflected his inner turmoil. We were redirected to investigate the Tate when it first appeared in Earth's orbit, before the invasion, before the moon was destroyed. Her words painted a timeline that contradicted the official history, suggesting that the massive space station had arrived before the scavengers, not as humanity's response to them. As Julia described the crew's approach to the mysterious object, Jack felt the walls of his reality beginning to crack, memories seeping through like water through damaged concrete. Vika's reaction was predictable. Immediate contact with mission control, urgent reports of a security breach, and demands that the stranger be removed from their tower immediately. But when Sally, their mission control liaison, ordered Julia's termination rather than transport to Titan, Jack's suspicions deepened into certainty that something was profoundly wrong. The nuclear wasteland below suddenly seemed less threatening than the lies that had shaped his existence. "We need to go back to the crash site," Jack told Julia when Vika was distracted by the tower's monitoring systems. "There might be evidence there, something to help us understand what's really happening." Together they slipped away in his bubble ship, racing toward answers while Tete's drones mobilized to track them down. Their investigation at the Odyssey's crash site revealed more than Jack was prepared for. Flight recorders containing data from 60 years earlier, star charts showing Earth before the moon's destruction, and crew manifests listing both Jack Harper and Julia Rusakova as mission specialists. The evidence was irrefutable, but before they could fully process these discoveries, spotlights cut through the radioactive haze around them. Jack reached for his weapon, expecting Tet's security drones, but instead found themselves surrounded by figures in radiation suits, human figures, moving with purpose and precision through the wasteland that was supposed to be uninhabited. "Don't shoot!" called a gruff voice as one figure removed his helmet, revealing a weathered face marked by radiation burns and years of survival. "We've been waiting a long time for you to remember who you really are, Commander Harper." The underground resistance bunker was a stark contrast to Jack's sterile tower, walls covered with maps and technical diagrams, the air thick with the scent of recycled oxygen and human determination. Malcolm Beach, the resistance leader, didn't waste time with gentle revelations. "Those drones you've been fixing? They're not hunting scavengers. They're hunting us, the last free humans on Earth." He played a series of recordings showing drone attacks on human settlements, the brutal efficiency with which they eliminated anyone trying to rebuild civilization on the radioactive surface. Julia squeezed Jack's hand as realization dawned on his face. Every repair he'd performed had strengthened the very system keeping humanity enslaved in their own wasteland, after the devastating nuclear war that had followed the alien invasion of 2077. "There were never any scavengers," Beach continued, his voice heavy with the weight of hidden truth. "The Tate is the invasion, an alien intelligence that arrived, destroyed our moon, manufactured a war, and has been draining Earth's resources ever since. The Resistance had spent decades mapping drone patterns, tracking resource extraction, and intercepting communications from the massive space station. The evidence was overwhelming. No human colony existed on Titan. No evacuation had taken place. Instead, the Tate had created an elaborate fiction, using drones and human operators to systematically harvest everything of value from Earth while eliminating any survivors who might interfere with its mission. The final blow to Jack's fractured identity came when Beach revealed security footage from multiple sectors, identical towers with identical occupants, each pair consisting of a technician named Jack Harper and a communications officer named Vika. "You're not unique, son," Beach said, compassion softening his battle-hardened features. "You're Tech 49, but there's a Tech 48, a 50, and dozens more across the planet. All clones, all with the same memories, all believing they're protecting humanity while actually helping to destroy it." Jack stared at the images of his duplicates, each maintaining their assigned sector with the same dedication he had shown, each unaware they were merely tools in an alien harvesting operation. The truth about his identity left him reeling, but somewhere beneath the shock, a very human emotion began to form, the desire for freedom. Identity is a curious thing, fragile as glass yet resilient enough to rebuild itself from fragments. And Jack's shattered sense of self began reassembling with a new purpose as he processed Beach's revelations. The memory loss, the dreams, the tower routines, they're all control mechanisms. the Resistance leader explained, while leading Jack and Julia through the underground complex where survivors had hidden for generations. Children born in darkness looked at Jack with a mixture of fear and fascination, recognizing the face of the technician whose drones had hunted their parents across the radioactive wasteland. Yet despite learning he was a clone, created by the Tet to serve its extraction mission, Jack felt more human than ever before, the pain of deception and the burning need for redemption connecting him to humanity's essence in ways his programmed existence never had. The Resistance had spent decades developing a plan to destroy the Tet, but they lacked one crucial element, someone who could access the space station's core without triggering its security protocols. The Tet recognizes you as part of its system, Beach explained, showing Jack the modified nuclear device they had salvaged from an old military bunker. You can deliver this to the central processing unit, the heart of the alien intelligence. Julia protested immediately, unwilling to lose Jack after finding him again, but the weight of responsibility settled on his shoulders with undeniable gravity. Millions had died during the false scavenger invasion and the nuclear war that followed in 2077, and billions more would never exist if Earth remained under the Tet's control. A sacrifice was necessary, and Jack finally understood his true purpose. Training began immediately, Jack learning to navigate the Resistance's tunnels, studying the Tet's schematics, and preparing for a mission that offered little chance of survival. During rare quiet moments, he and Julia retreated to a small chamber where they pieced together their shared past, memories of their Odyssey mission slowly emerging from the fog of manufactured history. "I built a cabin by a lake before we left Earth," Jack told her one night, sketching the simple structure on a scrap of paper. "I always dreamed of taking you there." Julia pressed the drawing to her heart, a promise of what might have been that somehow strengthened their resolve to fight for Earth's future. Meanwhile, the Resistance monitored increased drone activity above. The Tet had detected inconsistencies in Tech 49's behavior and was beginning to mobilize its forces for what would become the final battle for humanity's freedom. The assault came without warning. Drones swarming the Resistance hideout in overwhelming numbers, their weapons cutting through concrete and steel with terrifying precision. Chaos erupted as survivors fled deeper into the tunnel network, many falling to drone fire before reaching safety. "This is it!" Beach shouted over the deafening explosions, his face illuminated by emergency lighting as he handed Jack the nuclear device. "The Tet must know we've discovered the truth. It's now or never." Julia fought alongside the Resistance, her astronaut training proving valuable in the desperate battle, but the human fighters were drastically outmatched by the alien technology. When a support beam collapsed, trapping Beach beneath rubble, Jack made a split-second decision that would alter the course of Earth's future. Instead of taking Julia to the Tet as originally planned, he would take the injured Resistance leader, ensuring Julia's survival while still completing the mission. "I'm coming back," Jack promised, as he kissed Julia goodbye at the entrance to his hidden lake house, where she would wait in relative safety. The lie tasted bitter but necessary. They both knew this was a one-way journey, though neither could bear to acknowledge it. As Jack's bubble ship carried him and Beach toward the massive space station hovering above Earth's atmosphere, memories continued flooding back. Fragments of his original life before being cloned, glimpses of happiness. Before the false invasion of 2077 had changed everything, the approach to Tet was surprisingly easy, the station's systems recognizing Jack's signature and allowing him entry without resistance. "It doesn't know which Jack Harper we are," Beach observed grimly as they navigated through the sterile corridors, the nuclear device concealed in a drone repair kit. The central processing chamber revealed the horrifying scale of the alien deception. Thousands of sleeping clones suspended in fluid-filled chambers, each bearing Jack's face, each waiting to replace any unit that began questioning its programming. Similarly, rows of Vika clones hung in suspended animation, ready to maintain the illusion of human connection while ensuring compliance with the alien agenda. As security protocols finally detected the unauthorized presence, Jack rushed to place the explosive at the core of the massive system while Beach held off the mechanical defenders. In his final moments, as the countdown reached 0, Jack experienced a moment of perfect clarity. He wasn't merely destroying an alien intelligence. He was freeing humanity to reclaim their radioactive wasteland and rebuild from the ashes of nuclear war. His last thought before the blinding flash wasn't of sacrifice, but of Julia waiting by the lake, a symbol of the future he was giving his life to create. Time heals all wounds, they say, but some wounds transform into something new entirely. Scars that tell stories of battles fought and won. 5 years after the destruction of Tete, Earth began a remarkable recovery that few could have predicted. The radioactive levels gradually declined as the planet's natural systems reasserted themselves, patches of green emerging from the wasteland, like hope made tangible. Julia established a small community near the lake house, teaching survivors agricultural techniques developed during NASA's Mars preparation studies. Her daughter, born 2 years after the final battle, had never known a world controlled by alien intelligence, her laughter echoing across water that was finally safe to touch. A sound that would have seemed impossible in the dark days of 2077 when humanity believed they had lost everything. "Tell me about my father again," the child would ask as twilight painted the sky in colors that had been absent during the nuclear winter. Julia would describe Jack's courage, his love for Earth despite being programmed to participate in its destruction, omitting the complicated truth about his origins. The resistance members who had survived the drone assault had scattered across the continent, establishing communication networks and mapping the planet's recovery. Reports came in monthly of new settlements emerging, of innovative techniques to accelerate decontamination, of humanity doing what it had always done best, adapting, surviving, thriving against impossible odds. The moon remained shattered, its fragments forming a ring around Earth that glowed silver in the night sky, a constant reminder of how close they had come to extinction. The figure appeared on the horizon one evening as Julia was teaching her daughter about the constellations visible through their small telescope. Tall and familiar, he approached with hesitant steps, as if uncertain of his welcome. Tech 52, physically. Identical to the Jack who had sacrificed himself to destroy the Tate, yet with different experiences, different memories formed during his assignment to a distant sector. When the space station exploded, all remaining clones had awakened from their programming, suddenly free but lost. Their purpose vanished along with their creator. Most had perished in the ensuing chaos, but a few had begun experiencing the same. Dreams that had haunted Tech 49, images of Julia, of the lake house, of a life before the false invasion. Against all odds, this one had followed those fragments across a recovering wasteland, drawn by something stronger than alien programming, the human capacity for love, for connection, for hope that transcends even the most carefully constructed deceptions of identity. What do you think happened to the clones who weren't awakened before the Tete's destruction? Are they still out there, waiting to be discovered in forgotten sectors of our broken world? And what about the true origins of the aliens who created the space station? Were they simply resource gatherers, or was there a deeper purpose behind their invasion of Earth? The truth is even more shocking than you might imagine, and I've uncovered documents that reveal the connection between the scavengers and humanity's own future. Want to know how Jack Harper's sacrifice ties into the discovery of faster than light? Travel in 2089? The answers are waiting for you in our next video appearing on your screen right now. Are we truly free from alien influence? Or has the evacuation to Titan opened us up to even greater manipulation? Click now to continue this incredible journey through humanity's darkest chapter and most triumphant rebirth. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss our explosive reveal next week about what really happened. To the moon in 2077, the evidence will change everything you thought you knew about our place in the universe.